Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Found another piece in the jigsaw puzzle. Stupid of me not to think of it, but thanks for the reminder. Nutrients. Okay? There's if you don't give your plants any, they're not going to get much, basically, especially if you're in totally inorganic stuff. They can only get what you give them. Obviously, synthesis provides a bit through the top end of the plant, but without the other elements coming in from the bottom, your plant just isn't going to do very well. It might not die, but it ain't going to grow much. So we provide nutrients in some shape or form via whatever fertilizers we choose. Yeah, okay. The makeup of those, at this point, I'm not fussed. Quite honestly, you do what you choose your fertilizer based on its makeup. But if some of that stuff doesn't get in at the bottom end of the plant, it's not going to do well. Let's just put it that way. There's loads of different mixes and balances and all things like that. So, reasons for your plant not getting its nutrients are it's got next to no roots or a very, very poor root system. Well, that's one thing. The second reason it might not be getting any is because you're not giving it any. And then we get on to this point. I've been feeding at lower levels this year, just on the grounds that most orchids grow incredibly slowly. So they don't need high volumes of nutrients. There are exceptions to this. The old humble Phalaenopsis is actually quite a greedy beastie. Vandas are quite greedy beasties, and Catasetums, well, I haven't got any, so I'm not going down that road. But they are greedy. And all you've got to do is look at the growth rate. You know, if you look at a Catasetum, it goes from nothing to something incredibly quickly, and that something can be huge. Well, it's not going to do that on its own. It needs food. Right, so now we get to the missing part from the jigsaw puzzle. I start with RO water, which is, to all intents and purposes, pure. And as such, it gives me a TDS reading of next to nothing. It's about 10, sometimes 11, but, you know, that's next to nothing. But I've also got another meter. It's called a pH meter. And the pH of that water is bang on neutral, 7, right in the middle. Okay. And then I start adding my fertilizer, and I've been giving it low levels, certainly in the spring. That has an effect on the pH. It lowers it. The fertilizer lowers the pH value, which turns it a little more acidic, which, as we all know, or don't as the case may be, helps. But do we actually know why it helps? You can get what's called nutrient block due to the pH being too high. Now, if it's the type of plant like, you know, certain plants that grow in rocky areas and things like that, certain Paphiopedilums that actually like a more alkaline solution, they have evolved to be able to take on the nutrients at higher pH levels. Most plants can't. If the pH isn't low enough, you get nutrient block. So you may be providing those nutrients, but without a suitable pH to go with it, the nutrients get blocked. The plant can't absorb them as well as if the pH value was at a more suitable level. Now, pH values for orchids, there's not a lot of work been done on this, but if you just think of them as plants, you know, okay, they are special plants, they're epiphytes, but, you know, lots of ferns grow epiphytically and various other plants, bromeliads and stuff like that. They're not totally unique on hanging off of trees and making a living, you know. But basically, it's recommended that a pH level of somewhere between 5.5 and 6.5 is pretty good. But up at the 6.5 end, you're above the level that calcium can be absorbed efficiently. And you really need to get down below 6 before the calcium can get in there at a suitable rate. What happens when these nutrients get into the plant is deep and meaningful science. I ain't going there, quite honestly. It's so flipping complicated. You know, the cell structures and membranes and what's absorbed and what mixes with this to make that. And it's just complicated, and I don't need to know. You know, my interest level's sparked, but it's just too deep. I don't need to know. But I'm prepared to accept the fact that if my pH level was down below the 6 mark, the absorption of the nutrients that I'm providing would be more efficient and therefore more successful in the way the plant could use them. Now let's think what I've been doing. I've been using my fertilizer at quite low levels, and I've just checked, and the normal average feed level is going to take the pH down to about 6.4, 6.5. My higher feed level that I apply now and again when I remember to my Phalaenopsis, it brings the pH down to about 6, 6.1. It's still 6 or above, and it could do with being below that 6 mark. Yeah, the 5.5 to 6 mark means the nutrients can be absorbed more efficiently, and once they're absorbed, the plant can choose to do with them as it will. But if they don't get in there, it can't choose to use them because it's not getting them. And I think this in part is the missing bit of the jigsaw puzzle, because I've been feeding at lower levels. My pH hasn't been dropping as much as I would be expecting it to. It's been staying higher than is good for some of the plants. Some plants just use more of certain elements and less of others. Some plants are quite greedy on the calcium and the magnesium front. Some just the magnesium, some just the calcium. You know, in various degrees. It's all chemistry and science, and not really knowledge that we need. But I'm seriously thinking of getting a pH lowering mechanism, and to all intents and purposes the cheapest and easiest to use is white vinegar. It's just basic acidity, and it would need such a tiny amount to drop my pH from 6.5 to say 5.7, 5.8. It's not going to do the plants any harm. I mean, it's used widely in hydroponic type growing, you know, which is all types of plants, not just orchids, but it's just a method to get the pH down at a more suitable level. So we'll see what happens, because obviously this idea of getting the CalMag, you know, is going to up to a degree the calcium and magnesium levels. I don't want to up them by much. It's just a token gesture really to see if it makes any difference to those plants. But if the pH is too high, it will be a useless effort, because if the pH is too high, the plants aren't going to absorb much anyway. So whatever goes in the pot isn't going to get used because the plant can't absorb it without a lower pH. It's all good fun, isn't it? I wonder how many more pieces of this jigsaw puzzle I'm going to find. And I still maintain that this is due to exceptional spring circumstances. The fact that we had a hell of a lot of sunnier days during March and April when things were coming into growth. So they were growing faster than normal, coming out of a period of dormancy, and would have just needed more nutrients than they were getting. Because I was feeding at low levels, introducing the feed gradually, coming out of the winter, like one does. And I just think because of the exceptional weather circumstances, my plants were getting underfed. And some of them didn't take a blind bit of notice because they grow so slowly. There's no effects on any of my cattleyas or anything like that. Oncidiums in the main look fine. You know, it's just a few plants have shown something which I've assumed is a deficiency. So when you're mucking about with all your fertilizers and your feed levels and using your TDS meters, don't forget your pH. You know, you can feed at quite a high level with a pH of 7.5 and your plants are not going to be able to use that fertilizer. So little of it will be absorbed because it effectively forms a block. The pH rises and the plant sets up a barrier and says, you know, this is no good, I don't like this, so my roots are not going to function very well. So it's not going to take on board your nutrients. So don't forget your pH. You get a cheap little, not very accurate but good enough meter off of eBay or Amazon or somewhere like that. They're not expensive and they're not that accurate, but they're good enough to know whether you've got a high pH or a low pH. You know, going down to 0.1 of a pH is all well and good, but you know, 0.1 or 2 out is not a big deal. If you were aiming at 5.5 and you happen to get 5.3 or 5.7, your world will not end. Yeah, it's not that much of a big deal. But the difference between 7.5 and 6.5 and 5.5 is considerable. Yeah. Now a lot of rainwater is already quite acidic. I mean, I've seen rainwater down around the 5 mark. You start adding fertilizer to that and you're starting to get heading towards pure vinegar, basically, too acidic. But yeah, so pH is important, and I just not completely forgotten it, I just hadn't remembered that by using lower fertilizer levels, the fertilizer wasn't lowering the pH as much as it would do at higher levels. It's got something in it, I don't care what it is, that actually lowers pH. It's there deliberately to get the pH down at a level where the plants can absorb the nutrients. It's all chemistry and science and stuff, but it's there for a reason. And if I'm not using as much of it, you know, the consequences are there. Anyway, I haven't been in here much lately. What with spraying and things being too wet yesterday, I hardly came in here at all. So we'll have a look round. It's a mount watering day, not a pot watering day. They're still soaking wet. But it looks like it's going to be a sunny day, and yeah, I'll have a look round. I don't think much has changed on the mounts, quite honestly, but we'll have a look round, see how we go, as they say. Okay, having had just quite a long chat about feed levels and pH and stuff like that, I've realised I've left it hanging, so I'm going to add this bit on the end because it's relevant to what I previously said. That, I'm getting quite good at guessing roughly how much water I need to do my mounts. In fact, it's going to need a bit more because I've changed the way I do things now. I used to change the water halfway through to allow for the iffy plants so that they were kept separate. But what I do now is I leave them all till the end. So it pays to mix up an amount that I need to do my mounts and use it. Yeah, and then any that's left over I just chuck and then start again. So that is RO water. Cheap TDS and cheap pH meters, eBay or Amazon. I got mine off eBay, and I think the pair were about 10-11 quid. This is not a lot of money and not essential. If everything you're doing is working fine and your orchids are growing well, you don't need all this. You know, but I've switched to RO water, which means I'm starting with pure water. It has nothing in it. If I just give my orchids that, they're not going to last too long. They might just about stay alive, but they ain't going to grow much. So obviously I need to add some stuff in. And the fertilizer I use is specifically designed to go with RO water. So far, so good. But just to give us a base reading, these are so easy to use. Turn it on, waggle it about in the water, and have a look at your reading. And as I predicted, I have a TDS reading of 10. You know, that's damn near pure water. What the 10 is, I don't know. But the fact that it's that low, I don't care. So that's my start point for my TDS meter. If you have these things, use them and turn them off. The battery will last you probably longer than you last. But if you leave them on, you gobble up the batteries. Now this pH meter always takes a while to settle. Its initial reading is high, and then wiggle it around, and what I'm expecting is 7. And what have I got? 7. Okay, so nothing's changed here. That also verifies to me that my RO unit doesn't need any membranes or filters replacing at this point in time. Okay, right, so that's my start point. Now we're going to sploop some stock solution. If I put that on my plants, I'd burn them. That is an incredibly strong stock solution. The idea being I keep it in the fridge, in the dark and in the cold, and was reliably informed from the guy from First Rays, Ray himself I believe, which is where I got the fertilizer. Well, I didn't get it, but it's where it came from. And he says it will keep for a goodly amount of time. He's not going to stick his neck out and say how long, but if it's kept cool and dark and always given a good shake, which it always gets, it will keep. And then you can just do a sploop. And we give it a stir. Make sure it's thoroughly mixed and dissolved in the water so that everything in that bowl has formed some form of equilibrium. And then we have another look, because this is complete guesswork. There's no science here. I don't even know how strong that stuff is. I don't need to. This is what I need to know about, what I'm going to put on the plants. Okay. Now that's taken the TDS reading to 124. So it's too low. I want to be higher than that. I'm not feeding my Masdevallias and Restrepias, I'm feeding actively growing plants. So we'll put another sploop in, and then what normally happens at this point is I've put too much in and I have to add a bit more water. But this is the only fiddly bit, quite honestly, and how long is it going to take? 2 minutes. And then I'm going to feed and water, you know, 80, 90 plants. I'll live with it. Okay, now that's taken my feed level up to a TDS reading of about 190. I'm happy with that for today. So that was a good guess on the sploop front. Yeah? But let's see what it's done to the pH, because it should have lowered it. Bloody better have. I know it has, I just want to prove the flipping point. The principle I'm after is how much it's lowered it by. Okay, my initial reading is 6. 5.9. I'd like to see 5.8 on there. I don't know whether I'm going to get it, but 5.9 will do. Yeah, it's hovering between 5.8 and 5.9. Yeah? So with a pH at that level, my nutrients should be absorbed by the plant successfully. That's quite important. Okay? Now you have to bear in mind what I said earlier in my chat. I've been feeding at lower levels leading into the growing season. So my TDS reading would probably have been about 100, 110. So my pH wouldn't have dropped as much as a consequence. Therefore it could have been a bit higher than would be required for the plants to successfully absorb the nutrients. They'd have absorbed some, but not as well as perhaps they should have done. Therein, potentially, lies my problem. I got into active growing and wasn't providing an environment where the plant could take up the nutrients properly. Another piece to the jigsaw puzzle. Now I'm going to mess you all up, because all of the readings that these give are directly affected by temperature. And no, I'm not going there. I'm not doing it. But if you're using cool water, your readings will be different. If you're using tepid water, your readings will be different. So they'll throw you. But what you have to do is get your readings that you're happy with, if you're using these sort of gadgets, with the water that you generally use. Now, my water is tepid. And the reason it's tepid is because I've just sterilised that bowl with boiling water. And I leave the boiling water in it while I make a coffee, yeah, or something like that. That heats that glass up considerably, And then obviously the boiling water goes down the sink, and I put my RO water straight in there. Now the fans have kicked in. And as a consequence, the RO water takes in some of that heat, and I end up with tepid water, which I'm happy with. Yeah? You put your finger in and it feels like the sort of water you're going to get in your bath at. It's too flipping warm. And if you go like that, oh, that's cold, it's too cold. Tepid water, room temperature-ish. Nice. So there we go. So when I'm using my higher feed levels, my pH is fine. But when I'm using low levels, it's probably a bit high. And if it's too high, the plants can't absorb the nutrients. This is simple plant science, relatively. Very easily available on the internet in many simple forms and scientific papers. So, you know, it's fact, basically. Not somebody guessing on what they did in their tomato plants last year. Yeah. So, it's pretty good stuff. But, somebody at the door. I'll be back. No, I'm not going to tell you who I'm voting for at the election. Go away, I'm busy. Flipping pestering people. I don't tell anybody who I vote for, but I'll let you into a secret. Most of the time I don't vote because they're all as bad as each other. If you vote for them, it just encourages them. Right, what I was going to say is my fertilizer came from First Ray. When I got it, I just asked a general question about mixing stock solutions. One of my viewers got straight onto First Ray Direct and asked him the question. And he got back to me personally about stock solutions. Now, you don't get much better customer service than that, sunshine. So I've done a contact to First Ray. They're busy at the moment. I think they're relocating or something. So as a company, I might not get a quick response. But First Ray provided a calculator, which is absolutely brilliant, because although I use a TDS meter, that gives me a general reading for everything in there, and it's a very simplified reading. The big boys, instead of using parts per million on one of these, they use the parts per million of the nitrogen element of their fertilizer for their control, and you know, how actively their plants are growing. So this is the big boy stuff now. Now I haven't got a clue how to measure that, but on First Ray's site, if you dig into the freebie stuff, there's a calculator, and you can put in the three main elements of your fertilizer, you know, the percentage that it says on the packet, and then you can put in how many teaspoons per gallon you use, and it will tell you what your TDS reading should be. Now, because of the way I work, back to front, the calculator doesn't work for me. So I've asked him a direct question. I've said, if I want to aim at 150 parts per million of nitrogen using your fertilizer, what TDS reading should I be aiming at? You see, working backwards. So I know what the TDS reading is, but I don't know how many parts per million of the nitrogen element that contains. So to get up with the big boys and get a bit more accurate, if I get a nice answer from Ray, I've asked about 100 parts per million nitrogen and 150 parts per million nitrogen. And from those two answers, I can work out anything else I need. Like if I needed 200 parts per million, you know, I need a TDS reading twice as high as for 100 parts per million nitrogen. You see what I mean? So relatively simple maths for a simple maths person like me that doesn't do maths. That's what bloody calculators are for. So anyway, that's just to finish that off. This TDS reading, which I'm now going to use for a general feed, is probably too low, because a rough calculation of the amount of nitrogen that's in here would be lower than recommended. So I'm still feeding at lower levels, but at least at this level the pH is down where I want it, and the feed that I'm about to apply can be used by the plant in the environment created around the roots. So it's going to work. But I've been feeding at much lower levels than this, on and off. You know, as I say, I feed like two relatively low levels, then perhaps a higher level, then a flush, something like that. You know, it's not static. I don't do it religiously like that every time. I vary it depending on the weather. Simple as that. If the weather's hotter on consecutive days, the plants are going to be more thirsty, so I would water more frequently, and the feed would therefore be applied more frequently. So it's not an exact science, but that's where I am. So I think that's a self-contained topic. Yeah? So I'll finish this one off, and if I do film anything else today, I'll sort of do that as a separate entity. So really this video's been about, you know, how the environment you need to create for your plants to be able to absorb nutrients and use them efficiently, and the variables that can affect that efficiency. The higher your pH for most orchids, the less efficient they will be at taking on board your nutrients. And although a pH of 7, bang in the middle, absolutely neutral, sounds good, it's not. More acidity helps the nutrient absorption until you get to the point where the acidity is just too high. And too high really, I think, for orchids is anything less than 5. Between 5 and 5.5, some of your plants might not be that happy, but between 5.5 and 6.5, somewhere in there, they should be okay. And in the middle of that point is the 6. And I think 5.8 to 6 is pretty good stuff, and should actually allow your plants to absorb their nutrients and utilize them and be happy bunnies and grow well. Now obviously if you keep chucking fertilizer on your plants when they're not actively growing, you just as well pour it down the sink. They're not going to use it. They only take on board what they can use, and the rest just sits in the media and doesn't get used, and as a consequence it could start building up, and then you get your salts build up, which can damage your roots. Oh, I've just seen a nice new growth on one of my plants. I'll get to that in a minute. It's because it's under my nose. Okay, so that's just a general chat. A few finer points, and like I said, stepping back, if your plants are growing well with the fertilizer you use and the water you use and you have no problems, disregard this video, because it's not, you don't need it. But you know, the knowledge for me helps me try and do the best for my orchids, which is what I hope we all strive to do. And getting the right levels of feed at the right time of year with a suitable environment, given the pH value and the temperatures and everything, for my orchids to use their nutrients and grow well, for me makes sense. Yeah? So that's what I'm after. And as I said, I've just got that little extra bit of information, which if I can get from first rays, I hope will be the final piece in this jigsaw puzzle. And for me, I hopefully will then have the complete picture. That will be a happy bunny. It's actually a happy bunny at the moment without the information from first rays, but I would like that last little bit. But as I said, the big boys, you know, they measure the parts per million of the nitrogen element in their well-balanced feed. That's what they do. And I have not got the ability to measure that. I don't even know what I'd need to measure that. But it seems to be done based on the relationship of the nitrogen in your feed and the amount of feed you add to your gallon of water. Well, because I don't do my feed like that, I can't use those calculations. I use a stock solution and a TDS meter. So I have to work backwards towards what the element of nitrogen is in that now, which I don't know. I can guess at it, but I don't know. So a little bit more information completes the picture. And don't all go away and worry. But if you think you might need this, you know, they're dirt cheap, and quite honestly, they're practically indestructible. I mean, if you drop them in the water, you'll mess up the electrics, don't get me wrong. They're not indestructible, but providing the business end is the only bit that ever goes in the water, and you remember to turn them off when you're not using them, they're not bad little gadgets. As I said, I think one was just under a £5 and one was about £6 something. Yeah, so about 11 quid I think for the pair, and I bought them as a pair because they were cheaper that way. But, okay, and as I said, if I think I need to lower my pH a little bit when I'm using lower levels of feed, the work I've done this morning, having a look around the internet, not just on orchids but on other types of plants and aquariums and all sorts of things, and if somebody's got fish in a tank, a lot of fish like pretty damn clean water or they're not happy, and if they're adding a small amount of white clean vinegar to lower their pH for their fish that breathe the flipping stuff in, I think the plants will be okay with it. And I've seen many blogs, many forums and things where people are using that to no harm to their orchids, and by getting the pH down, their nutrient absorption is then more efficient. So it sounds good. There's lots of pH up and pH down products, especially for aquarium type people. They're not cheap. When you actually look at the elements that are actually in there, and then you have a look at the element that is in clean white vinegar, you sort of think, well, why am I paying 10 quid for a bottle of that when I could pay £1.99 in the supermarket for the other stuff, when it's virtually the same? Yeah. So anyway, I might give that a try. That'll do for that one. That's long enough. And I'm sure to a lot of people this is not even relevant. To some it might be like gold dust, and many it will be somewhere in between, and to some it will only be of interest because they like listening to interesting things, and to others they don't give a monkeys. But it's done now, and I think I've really gone over the whole subject in this video, so I don't need to do it again, do I hope. See you again next time. Thanks for dropping by.